Hello everybody, welcome to the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We're only 4 weeks away from the election. Some of you may already have your ballots and are in the process of voting. We have yet to have a conversation with the two remaining candidates for governor, Professor Chris Peterson, who's the Democratic candidate, and his answers in comparison with Spencer Cox, Lieutenant Governor of the state of Utah. So today we're going to task that for the county seat. We will begin with a conversation we had recently with Professor Chris Peterson. Joining us right now for this part of the conversation is Democratic candidate for governor Chris Peterson, who's a professor at the Quinney Law School at the University of Utah and a West Valley boy, went to Granger and has affiliation with Bingham as well. Professor Peterson, thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to talk about county government and some of the challenges that we're facing in this state and how we can move forward to make our state the best it can be.
As I've asked the other candidates that we've talked to so far, what would be your top priorities? Give me 2 or 3, 4 of the top priorities of your administration.
Sure. Well, look, the first priority has to be getting this virus under control and getting our economy back on track. Right now, people are struggling across the state. We've had tens of thousands of people get sick and hundreds of people dying. And it's also depressing our economy because people are afraid that they're going to get that long-term lung scarring, that it's going to cause kidney damage or heart disease, or even in some instances brain damage. We have to do everything that we can within reason to try to get the virus under control. We're going to need to work together to cooperate and make sure we're following the best available science in order to make progress on this virus. That's the first and top priority I have. Keep people safe and get the economy on track. But second, I think that it's time in our state to second priority, time in our state to try to get a little bit more balance in our government and make sure that we're have a government that's responsive to the will of the public. You know, in the last election, we had 3 different ballot measures that passed. A majority of the residents, the citizens of Utah, adopted Medicaid expansion to leverage our federal tax dollars to get health care back to the state. Also, medical marijuana under the supervision of a physician, and fair legislative redistricting with nonpartisan districts. But all 3 of those ballot measures, the legislature and the current administration watered them down, repealed and replaced them with something that's not what the public voted for. I'm going to listen to those ballot measures and to future ballot measures and protect those propositions. That's my second priority. Third, we've got to make progress on some of these long-standing issues. I'll mention in particular education. We have the lowest per pupil funding in America in our public schools. Too many of our kids are not learning to read on time. One in 4 kids in 4th grade can't read at a basic level in our state. That's not good enough to win the 21st century. I'm going to focus on that. A number of other priorities that we'll talk about later on as well.
What do you think has been working with the current administration, and what do you think needs to be changed?
Sometimes as a Democrat in Utah, I know what that means. I am a Utah Democrat. I'm a moderate and I'm fiscally responsible. And so here are the things that I think we're doing a good job at. We're doing a pretty good job watching spending. We're fiscally prudent in this state. That's how I run my life. That's how I want government and businesses to run. I think it's important for us to try to keep taxes low and have a regulatory environment that's open to free enterprise to keep our economy moving ahead. I do think that there are some challenges that we can identify that are not being addressed over time, and those are the places where I want to improve. I want to keep the things that we're doing right, and then in a thoughtful and a cooperative way, move forward and make progress on the places where we have challenges.
What do you think some of those challenges are?
Sure. Well, the first one I already mentioned. We're dead last in the country in per pupil spending in our public schools. Part of that's because we have big families in the state. We also have a large portion, 2/3, almost 70% of our land is owned by the federal government, and that decreases the available property taxes, real challenge for county governments, and that makes it harder for us to fund our education. But one of the benefits that we have in this state is a diversified economy with agriculture, tourism, energy, banking, and the tech sector. We have a really diversified economy and can afford to invest in our kids. We just have to have the political will to make sure that the job gets done. So that's one place where we really need to have improvement. Second, we have some challenges with diversity and inclusion. Did you know that we have the largest gender wage gap in America? So the women in our state are not getting paid fair wages, and it's not because they're not in the labor market. We have high labor market participation rates for women. It's just that they're getting left behind. We could do better on that. Last, I'll also mention we have real challenges with mental health care. Did you know that sadly in our state we have one of the highest depression and suicide, especially teen suicide rates in this country? Part of the reason for that is that we don't have broad access to health insurance and health care, and we have people who are not feeling included and are being left behind. And those tragedies, they spread out, they ripple across families and neighborhoods and generations. We've got to do a better job taking care of our people and making sure that this Utah success that we can all be so proud of is one that's shared by everybody.
We'll be right back on the county seat. Welcome back to the county seat, talking with Professor Chris Peterson, Democratic candidate for governor of the state of Utah. Let's look at some of the issues that we've talked to other candidates about that are really important. How do you intend to approach energy production in Utah, and what are the elements that will make up that portfolio? Is fossil fuel finished?
Well, fossil fuel is not finished by any stretch of the imagination, and it's going to be part of our energy business or energy strategy for the state going forward. I'm very proud that I'm endorsed by the United Mine Workers, and I want to make sure that we have jobs available for the folks out there in Duchesne and Price. But the simple fact is that coal is becoming less competitive, and there's change in the world. Some people want to pretend it's not happening, but the fossil fuel use across time, it's changing our climate. We're finding all that oil and coal and gas, and with one internal combustion engine after another, we keep burning it, and we're so good at it that we're changing the chemical composition of our atmosphere, and it's causing global average temperatures to rise. It's creating wild fluctuations in our weather, and it's going to get worse. Reasonable minds disagree about this, but not reasonable scientists. Virtually every qualified scientist in the world now believes that man-made, human-made climate change is causing a long-term crisis for our society. So we do need to try to diversify our energy strategy, and Utah there's a lot of good news there because we have the third largest untapped geothermal energy reserves in America. We have enormous amounts of sunshine in the state to create great new solar power plants and some great wind power plants. So I think that we've got to start diversifying and making sure that the folks that are in oil and gas and coal can transition to some of these great clean energy jobs.
Does nuclear have a picture in Utah's future portfolio?
Well, I'm willing to have a conversation about it. Obviously, I worry about the storage of nuclear fuels and the long-term toxic legacy of radioactive waste. And I also worry about some of the nuclear disasters we've seen, whether that's Fukushima in Japan or Chernobyl earlier in Eastern Europe. But I do think that we have real challenges to take on, and a safe, focused nuclear energy portfolio is something that I'm willing to consider as part of it. I especially think that given the severity of the challenge that we're facing with respect to climate change, I'm open to that possibility. One thing I will say, though, is I'm not particularly excited about taking on the toxic waste of other countries and other places around the world. We have a great natural lands heritage in this state, and I'm reluctant to bury that out in the deserts, only to have that be a problem for our children and grandchildren 2,500 years down the road. So I'm cautious about nuclear power, but recognize that there's some tremendous advantages there, and it's something that we need to consider.
After the last recession during the economic recovery, Utah did great for the most part. Some of the counties got left behind, and they never really got out of that poverty situation. How do we make the economy work for all Utahns?
Great question. And I agree with you, by the way. I want you to know that during that time, I was working back in Washington, D.C., trying to take on special interests to make sure that we had fair financial products, which was a critical cause of that financial crisis. But to answer your question, I think that we need to invest in infrastructure, and we need to start spreading out, having good career-paying jobs out in more rural areas of our state. For example, I believe that we should take advantage of rock bottom interest rates right now and do a bond to try to create rural broadband in this state. The state of Maine just voted to do exactly that. Why is Utah lagging behind, especially with our Silicon Slopes industry? We should be making sure that people can telecommute from Blanding, from Price, from St. George, maybe come in once or twice a month to Lehigh or Sandy to come back where the businesses are headquartered. That's a great way to have the technology labor market dollars go farther, because it'll also alleviate pressure on our housing affordability problem, especially along the Wasatch Front. If you have a good paying job with one of our Silicon Slopes businesses, you're going to be able to have a nicer home if you locate out in a more rural area.
If all of that development is tech sector, we become a one industry state. Manufacturing and some other jobs really should be part of that broad portfolio. Do you see the inland port being a good move in that right direction, or do you see it as being a bad move?
Well, I think it's mixed. First off, I think that I'm a little worried about the heavy hand that the state legislature had with local county government here in Salt Lake. I want your listeners to know in particular that I think that the state needs to act in partnership with respect to all of the county, city, and town governments across the state, and make sure that local stakeholders have a seat at the table. I'm not so sure that happened here in Salt Lake. I do think that we've got to make sure that we're developing jobs of the future, and the inland port is an important way to do that. One of the challenges, though, is that people in the Salt Lake Valley are very concerned about air pollution, and anybody that's living outside Salt Lake County will understand it if they come here and feel the effects of our inversion and high ozone. So I want to make sure that as we go forward with the inland port, we do everything that we can to make sure that we're diminishing the overall pollution effect of the inland port by quickly transitioning to plug-in hybrid and electric vehicles, rooftop solar, and making sure that we do what we can to try to keep down that pollution.
Pick one or the other. Public land policy or how we develop water in the state. Which one? Pick one and answer it.
Well, public lands, I think we need to fight the federal government to make sure we get more payment in lieu of tax revenue. We also need to make sure that we're getting the best deal on energy royalties that's possible. And we also need to preserve those public lands for the long-term future. On water, you can count on me to try to develop water infrastructure, also facilitating conservation, because as the climate's getting drier, it's going to be harder and harder to get the water that we need to our agricultural industry, which I value and want to support.
Okay, one last sentence. How do you see your relationship to the counties as a state government?
A partnership, teamwork and partnership. That's what I believe in. I want you to know that I'm a Democrat, but I'm a Utah Democrat. I want to try to be the kind of leader that we had in Scott Matheson Sr. and Cal Rampton, a cooperative, team-oriented person that tries to solve problems through bipartisanship and practical public service.
Okay, Professor Peterson, thank you very much for your time. One down, one to go. We will be right back after a commercial break with our conversation with Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox. Welcome back to the county seat as we're doing our countdown to Election Day. We are now going to re-air portions of a conversation that we had with Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox on the issues important to rural Utah in a conversation that we had with him on May 19th. Lieutenant Governor, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, Chad. It's great. It's always great to be with you. It's good to be back on the show.
Thank you. We have four general topics that are all questions that have been generated from counties, and they wanted these covered. We're going to ask each of the candidates these questions. Within the goals of governance, what are going to be the top priorities of the Cox administration?
Well, this answer may have been a little different 2 months ago than it is today, but I think certainly and unequivocally the number one priority will be economic recovery. This pandemic, what it's done to our economy here in the state of Utah, our national economy, our global economy is really unprecedented. And so whoever the next governor is, the focus has to be on economic recovery, making sure that we reestablish the foundations. Now, the good news is that the foundations foundations here in the state of Utah are very strong coming into this economy because of the great work that has taken place over the last 10 years. We had the lowest unemployment in our state's history, the lowest unemployment in the country. We led the nation in private sector job growth. We had the most diverse economy in the country. All of those things are going to allow us to come out of this in better shape than any other state. In fact, we just found out that we were one of two states, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce said we're one of two states, they believe, that has an unemployment below 10% right now. It's a terrible number, but again, in comparison, much better than what the rest of the country is experiencing. And we know we have the entrepreneurs here to lead us out of this. That's what happens. Government doesn't create jobs. Government can get in the way. And the way we did this before was by removing regulation, business regulation, government regulation, and overreach, and allowing the entrepreneurs of the state to flourish. And that's how we're going to do it again.
What has worked from this administration, and what do you intend to change in your administration?
I'm very proud to be part of the Herbert administration. Of course, I came in later, about 6.5 years ago, and there are some great things to learn from Governor Herbert. He is a collaborator. He believes in bringing people together. He is a strong and focused leader. And when he came in the depths of the Great Recession, he really laid the groundwork for how to recover from something like what we're experiencing right now. And so I think that's very important, the things that we've learned from that. Now, as far as a new administration coming in, anytime you change an administration, it's the perfect time to reevaluate what government has been doing. One of the things that we're very proud of is that we have fewer government employees now than we did in 2004. In fact, 10 years ago, we had one state government employee for every 125 Utahns. Now it's one for every 155 Utahns, which has saved $2 billion for the state of Utah. My administration coming in, we will reevaluate everything. It's a chance to look at what's working, what hasn't been working. Government, the tendency of government is to grow. Things that we did 20 years ago maybe made sense that don't make sense now, and we have an opportunity to reevaluate and eliminate those things that aren't necessary.
I'd like to turn my attention to energy. It is one of the key components of the state of Utah, and there's been a real tussle. The Uinta Basin is feeling like they're being a little bit left behind because the Kem Gardner study just said, well, you guys need to find something else to do, and they believe that fossil fuels and coal still plays an important part for decades to come. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they're right. They're absolutely right. Coal and fossil fuels are going to play a huge role in the decades to come. Look, we are an all of the above state, and I support renewable energy. I support what's happening in the wind and solar industries, but at the same time, it's those energy fields in the basin. I come from coal country. That's how we built this state. It's the cheap energy that has given us the economic boost that we needed in the early days to provide us with what we have now, and that's going to be the bridge to the future, and we're still a long ways away from that. We must invest in the infrastructure that's necessary, like the rail program project out in the Uinta Basin. Again, coal isn't going anywhere. In fact, coal is expanding right now in the state of Utah. I was at the mines just a few months ago before all of this shut down in Emery County and Carbon counties, talking about the expansion that's happening there. It's still a critical piece of Utah's economy and our nation's economy, and we can't forget them or leave them behind.
How does Utah's energy resource stack up to the nation's?
Well, we're very fortunate to live where we live. Again, to have an abundance of natural carbon-based fuels, as well as a natural abundance of solar, which is growing here in the state. We have wind projects here in the state. We have geothermal projects here in the state. We have the right portfolio. We have everything available, and that's very attractive to businesses that are looking to come to Utah.
Does nuclear have a place in that?
Yes, of course. In fact, it's probably one of the biggest mistakes we've made as a country in giving up on nuclear. It's clean, it can be done cheaply, and it can be done safely. And so we need to add that to the portfolio, and I'm grateful for the counties that are working on that.
We're going to take a quick break here, continue our conversation with Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox, and we'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking with Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox, and our time today has shifted from energy, and we're now going to go to the topic of the economy. What is the biggest challenge in the economy going forward.
2 months ago, we wouldn't have been talking about this virus and what's happened there. What we would be talking about, and I think it's just as important now as it was in times before, and that is on workforce. Making sure that we have the workforce for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. And that impacts both urban Utah and rural Utah. One of the biggest problems we had before this pandemic was that we couldn't find their employers that couldn't find employees for the jobs that were available on the Wasatch Front. Conversely, we had people off the Wasatch Front that needed these jobs. We have a real opportunity moving forward to make those connections happen, to make sure that we are at the college level, at the high school level, and then again, those people who are relearning, people who have maybe lost their jobs and are looking for a new opportunity to retool. We have to change the way that we look at education. We've separated work from education for far too long. It used to be that education was the thing you did for the first 20 years of your life and then work was what you did afterwards. That's no longer the case. We have to bring those two things back together. We have to make education cheaper, we have to make it more accessible, and we have to allow our workforce to train for the jobs that are available now. The economy is changing far too quickly for the education model of the last 100 years.
How do we go about equalizing the work portfolios? Is this a physical on location thing? Is this an online thing? How do we make this all work?
Yeah, so there's a couple things, but if there is a silver lining coming out of this, and one of the things I'm really looking forward to out of this pandemic, it is that we have learned that you can do things remotely better now than people probably thought before. This is something I've been screaming from the rooftops for a long time. In fact, a year ago, the governor gave me an opportunity to run an experiment with 130 employees here in the state where they worked from home for 3 to 5 days a week. The 6 months were phenomenal. Not only did we take cars off the road, which is good for the air pollution and traffic, not only were they happier, their mental health rates were higher than their colleagues, but their productivity went up 22%, which is going to save taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. We won't have to build nearly as many buildings. But the most important part was, now if you grew up in Scipio and you have a job for the state, you can take that job with you and move back to Scipio. Or if you live in Delta or Fillmore, wherever you live, you can now apply for those jobs on the Wasatch Front. That's going to change the way we do things as a state. It's going to bridge that gap in important ways. And now the private sector is figuring out, hey, we don't have to go to a cubicle every day for every job. There are better ways to do that. It's better for our employees, it's better for the future workforce, and it's better for rural Utah.
Let's shift our attention to land and water. This is a big issue for the state. Pick either one. Is it our relationship with the federal government on land and how we deal with that, or is it the water and how we protect our water resources and exploit them?
Well, they're both very connected, as we know, as we work on big projects. Look, infrastructure is going to be critical for the state. We are the fastest growing state in the nation over the last 10 years and will continue to be a fast growing state, which means we need to invest in infrastructure. Water is the single limiting factor. We are a very dry state. We have to use the water we have better, and we have to develop new sources of water. So again, the Lake Powell pipeline, other big water projects are going to be really important for our state moving forward.
Is it possible in this day and age to create new resources of water when the environmental hackles would be up over approaching that?
It is possible, especially when you have an administration that will support you at the federal level, which we do right now, and we need to continue to take advantage of that. But the same thing is true on the federal land side. Look, we make better decisions at the local level. That's really important to me, especially at the county level. As a former county commissioner, as a former mayor, I understand that. We know how lands impact us. My farm is right up next to the Forest Service land. My uncle still runs sheep on Forest Service and BLM land. We've seen firsthand the mismanagement at the federal level. We have to have more influence at the state level and at the local level when it comes to management of lands, and we have an administration that is open to that.
Would your administration be willing to roll up their sleeves and stand side by side with counties that are trying to take on some of these issues?
Absolutely. In fact, it's one of the reasons I'm running. This is something that I know firsthand as a county commissioner. I was one of those that had my sleeves rolled up, and we have to have a united front on all of these issues moving forward.
That concludes our conversation with Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox and Professor Chris Peterson. You have 4 weeks remaining. If you've not registered to vote, we encourage you to participate in this process. There's still time to call your county clerk and get registered. We appreciate your being involved, and make sure that you take the opportunity to vote either by mail or by dropping your ballots off in person. Remember, local government is where your life happens. Be part of the process, be involved, and we'll look for you next week with another interesting topic on the county seat. Thank you for watching The County Seat. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications to keep up to date on the program and happenings around Utah.